Most people trying to get to 10% body fat are doing everything right, and that's exactly the problem. In this video, I'm going to reveal my exact 4-step coaching process to go from 20% down to 10% body fat, what happens at each stage, and how to apply it even if you're not working with me directly, so you can finally get lean, stay lean, and feel confident every time you catch yourself in the mirror without the gym taking over your life or spending hours in the gym. Because I've been a personal trainer for 11 years and delivered over 8,500 one-to-one sessions, and this is the process I've refined across every single one. And the first step is the one almost every program skips entirely, and it's the reason most people never make it past week 4. So first up is step 1, which is the assessment week. One of my clients, Jimmy, rocked up, got in touch with me, good, because he'd been trying to shift the same 15 pounds for 4 bloody years. He was dedicated, like seriously committed. He was tracking his food religiously, Monday to Thursday, hitting the gym 3 or 4 times a week, cutting out all the obvious junk, doing everything he thought was right. But every single time he started getting somewhere, something would mess it up and the progress would just stall. And when I asked him what he was eating at the weekend, he said it was fine. It was okay. A meal out on Friday, a few drinks with the lads on Saturday, a Sunday roast, nothing too extreme. And here's where it gets interesting. Once I put him through the assessment week, the first thing every client I work with does before we change a single thing told a completely different story. What was actually happening Friday to Sunday was quietly wiping out every single bit of a calorie deficit he'd created Monday to Thursday. And it wasn't because he was reckless, but because nobody had ever actually looked at the full picture with him. He'd been operating on assumptions for years, and the assumptions were completely wrong. And I know what you're thinking. A week of tracking before you change anything feels like a waste of time when you just want to get started. But this is exactly the step that makes everything after it actually work, because you're building on real information rather than a complete guess. And that's what the assessment week is for. A week where we track everything before changing anything. Every meal, every snack, every training session with the actual weights on reps. Sleep, stress, how the week actually flows. And here's what almost always comes out of it. The gap between what people think they're doing and what they're actually doing is almost always bigger than expected. I've had clients certain they were eating 1,800 calories who were eating closer towards 2,800. I've had clients who thought they were applying progressive overload who hadn't added a weight to a single lift in 6 months. The assessment week reveals what's actually going on, and everything built after it is only as good as the information it's built on. So if you're doing this without a coach, this is step 1 regardless. Jimmy's 4 years of effort weren't wasted because he lacked commitment to get to the gym. They were wasted because nobody had ever looked properly at where the problem actually was. 7 days of data told us way more than 4 years of guessing. And once we had that picture, step 2 is where the actual build starts. And this is the step most people do first, which is exactly why most plans fall apart before they've even started, before they've even had a chance to work. Okay, so step 2. Cash, my client, came to me with a schedule which had approximately 0 margin for error. Demanding job, dinners out most weeks, early starts, late finishes, etc. The kind of week where a generic 5-day program lasts about 10 days before it collapses under the weight of real life. So the program we built looked nothing like what most coaching plans would have given to him. 3 full body sessions per week, early mornings before the family was awake, because that was the only time that reliably existed for him. Not because 3 days is a compromise, because 3 days is what his week could actually hold. And a program that survives your actual week will always outperform one that requires a better week than the one you live in. I know you've probably heard 3 days a week before and thought, it doesn't really sound like enough. And that's the fitness industry talking, and is a fitness industry in a nutshell. 3 days of properly structured, progressively overloaded full body training produces way better results than 5 days of inconsistent, unfocused sessions every single time. And the data from thousands of clients backs that up. And here's the part most training plans completely ignore. Each session was built around movements Cash knew well enough to push hard on safely. Not the theoretically optimal exercises, the ones he could take to genuine failure without the technique breaking down. 2 to 3 working sets per exercise, he logged his weights every single session, 1 job each week, which was beat last time. That's the entire training model, whether it was sets, reps, or weight. And here's the part in terms of nutrition, which most people miss as well. We track for the first 6 weeks. It's not forever, but long enough to close the same gap the assessment week identified. Once we had real data, a 300 to 500 calorie deficit, depending on where things were at, protein 0.7 to 1 gram per pound per body weight across 3 meals, and enough flexibility built in that the client dinners didn't become a source of guilt or a reason to write off their week completely. And here's what most coaches skip entirely, and it quietly determines whether any of this even works long term. Sleep at 7 hours minimum, stress managed as much as practically possible, and crucially, the program was built around his actual life. For example, if Friday evenings were always going to go off plan, we accounted for that, rather than pretending it wouldn't happen. A plan that pretends your life is different to what it actually is will fall apart the moment your life shows up. 12 weeks later, as you can see, Cash had the best body composition of his life. Not because of the program specifically, it was because the program was clever, because it was built around what was actually possible rather than what was theoretically optimal. And that's the actual difference between a plan and a process. And here's what step 3 gives you that no plan ever does. And a quick one, if you don't want to spend hours in the gym, I've got a completely free 4-week softer lean program, link in the description. It's based around these principles and it's a great starting point. And it's exactly the process I recommend if you were coming on as a client anyway. So next up we got step 3, which is the 6-week check. So 6 weeks into Cash's program, we stopped and we looked at the data properly. Not because something had gone wrong, but because this is the step that determines whether the next 6 weeks produces more progress than the first 6 or just more of the same. And it's the step most people skip entirely when they go in it alone. So here's what we looked at. Was the weight moving roughly as expected? Was it around 0.5 to 1 pound a week? Were the training numbers going up week on week? Was he actually hitting his protein target most days? Was the calorie deficit real or approximate and hoped for? And I know what most people do at 6 weeks. They either quit because they expected faster results, or they completely overhaul everything and start again. Both are the wrong move. What you actually need at 6 weeks is an honest data audit, not a motivational restart. And here's what I almost always find at the 6-week mark. In Cash's case, the training was progressing well. The weekday nutrition was on point, but the client dinners were consistently bigger than we'd accounted for. Not dramatically, just enough to slow progress a little bit from where it should have been. So here's what we did. We made a small adjustment, a bit more awareness around the dinners, slightly tighter on the days either side of it, nothing that required blowing up what was already working. And here's the thing about catching that at 6 weeks rather than at 12 weeks. Small adjustments earlier are way more effective than large adjustments too late. Most people who go it alone hit, say, 6 weeks and feel like it's not working fast enough and either quit or completely overhaul everything and change things, otherwise known as shiny object syndrome, which I've definitely been accustomed to over the years. Whereas the actual problem was something small that a single honest conversation would have fixed. If you're doing this yourself, at 6 weeks, look at your logbook, look at your training data, look at your weight trend and ask what the data is actually telling you. Not what you feel, what are the numbers saying? And step 4 is the one that determines whether everything you've just built actually lasts long term. So step 4 is the maintenance phase. Paddy, my client here, came to me having trained consistently for years and gone absolutely nowhere. And his progress just completely plateaued. He was the same shape, same weight, same body composition he'd had for as long as he could remember, despite putting the sessions in week after week. And when we looked at what was actually happening, the structure wasn't there. The accountability wasn't there. And the nutrition was built around supplements rather than the basics that actually move the needle. So we went strict first. And I want to be clear about what that actually means, because most content softens it in a way that sets people up for the wrong expectation. We dropped his calories into a real deficit, tracked everything, tightened the structure around both training and nutrition at the same time, no flexibility in the early weeks. And it's not because flexibility is bad, but because balance before you've earned the result is just maintenance at a weight you're not happy with. You have to do the work first. There's no way around it, unfortunately. I know that's not what most people want to hear, but everyone wants the version where you can be flexible from day one and still get lean. And that version exists, but only once you've built the foundation and hit the goal first, not before. Paddy stayed strict for a good few weeks, stayed consistent and got to his goal. And here's where the whole thing changed completely. And this is the part most coaching stops short of showing. We shifted the focus entirely. Calories came up towards maintenance. The obsessive tracking gave way to a set of simple principles that you could operate on without an app. And the nutrition became genuinely flexible in a way that the getting lean phase simply couldn't be. Meals out, a few drinks, weekends that didn't require precision, all of it absorbed by the structure underneath. And training shifted too. Still 3 sessions a week. That never changed. But the emphasis has moved from rapid progression towards consistent, sustainable progressive overload. There's less urgency, more enjoyment. The training data kept running, the weights kept going up, but the pressure of the deficit was completely gone. So we could actually gain a bit more strength quicker. Paddy said something that stuck with me as well. He trained for years, feeling like fitness fitness was always something he was behind on. After the maintenance phase was in place, it was just part of his week. And it wasn't a project anymore, not just a phase, just the thing he did without the weight of it. And this maintenance phase isn't the end of the process either. It's what the whole process was building towards. But here's the thing, most people who can't get from 20% to 10% body fat aren't failing because they lack effort or discipline. They're failing because they're missing a crucial step. Usually the first one, but sometimes the last one. And the plan they're following has no way of telling them that. But before any of this makes sense, before the assessment week, before the program, before any of it, there's one thing most people have never addressed. The reason they can't hit 10% body fat that has nothing to do with their effort, their consistency, or even the plan. And I made a video about exactly what that is somewhere over here, so watch that if you haven't already next.